President Donald Trump announces the U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Climate Change Accords. We'll explain why and how the announcement is playing around the world. China's ambitious new Silk Road trade route takes shape in Africa. And can this new test track bring pod travel closer? Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. We start on a rather sad note here. At least 15 children died in South Sudan in May after health workers vaccinated them with a contaminated measles vaccine. South Sudan's Health Minister Riek Guy Kak said on Friday that another 32 have recovered after falling ill with symptoms including fever, vomiting and diarrhea. An estimated 300 children were vaccinated in Nakochalkopel, a village in eastern Equatorial State. Evidence gathered by the National Adverse Events Committee investigators indicates that the vaccination team did not adhere to the WHO approved immunization safety standards. A single reconstitution syringe was used for multiple vaccine vials for the entire 4 days of the campaign instead of being discarded after single use. Now, the reuse of the reconstitution syringe causes it to become contaminated, which in turn contaminates the measles vaccine vials and infects the vaccinated children. Now, the report also states the vaccines were stored in a building with no cold chain facilities for up to 4 days. Not too far from there, the United States on Thursday imposed sanctions on General Francois Olenga. He's the top military advisor of Democratic Republic of Congo President Joseph Kabila. The action is aimed at increasing pressure on Kabila's government over election delays and alleged human rights abuses. Now, the move follows travel bans and assets freezes announced on Monday by the European Union against 9 Congo nationals and aimed at pushing Congo's government to hold an election to replace Kabila by the end of the year. Now, Kabila, in power since 2001, refused to step down after his mandate expired in December. Congo has repeatedly denounced sanctions by the EU and US as unjustified and illegal and has threatened diplomatic retaliation. It was not immediately clear, though, whether General Olenga actually possesses assets within US jurisdiction. Well, President Donald Trump has announced that he is withdrawing the United States from the landmark international agreement that committed nearly every nation to take action to curb global warming. VOA's Peter Heinlein reports that the decision is being met with dismay by environmentalists, foreign allies, and a significant number of influential business leaders.
4 months into his presidency, Donald Trump made good on a campaign promise.
The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
He argued that the Paris Accord saddled the United States with onerous regulations that would stymie economic growth. Environmental activists and Obama administration officials were predictably disappointed at seeing years of hard work to bring the United States into a global climate pact effectively undone.
The U.S. has always been the strongest and most progressive negotiator on that kind of equal playing field on this. So if the U.S. negotiators are not at the table, we lose one of the strongest, most compelling voices to make sure that Paris fulfills that promise.
More surprisingly, the chiefs of some of the biggest names in American business took out a full-page ad in leading newspapers rebutting Trump's claim that the accord would cost jobs and competitiveness.
The world's most profitable companies, they're U.S. companies. They're also the smartest ones who say, hey, I'm Apple, Google, Microsoft, Ford, whoever. They're making massive investments in clean energy because they don't want to be left behind.
Several members of Trump's inner circle, including daughter Ivanka, son-in-law Jared Kushner, and key cabinet members, were said to have argued strongly against pulling out of the accord. But in the end, supporters say it came down to one issue: the economy.
He thought that the regulations and the climate and energy policies of the previous administration were hurting the U.S. economy, that they were hurting people, they were retarding job growth, and it was not in the interest of the United States.
While Trump said he would negotiate to re-enter the Paris Accords on new terms, his decision is expected to have some far-reaching consequences. One immediate reaction came from billionaire investor Elon Musk, the founder of SpaceX, who resigned from the 3 White House advisory boards he was appointed to by Trump. Peter Heinlein, VOA News, the White House.
Well, the Trump administration's announcement to withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Change Agreement is prompting swift reaction around the world. Jessamine Oni has more.
While protesters rallied outside the White House, Paris lit up its city hall in green light in response to President Donald Trump's announcement to pull the U.S. out of the Paris Agreement on climate change.
The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
The landmark agreement consists of nearly 200 countries pledging to cut back on greenhouse gas emissions in an effort to combat climate change. Former President Barack Obama, whose administration championed the deal, was quick to condemn the decision. In a statement, Obama said, "The nations that remain in the Paris Agreement will be the nations that reap the benefits in jobs and industries created." Many world leaders, including French President Emmanuel Macron, also are criticizing Trump.
I do respect this decision, but I do think it is an actual mistake, both for the U.S. and for our planet.
The UN calls the withdrawal a major disappointment for worldwide efforts to promote global security.
The Paris Agreement was adopted by all the world's nations in 2015 because they recognize the immense harm that climate change is already causing and the enormous opportunity that climate action represents.
Anticipating the announcement, German Chancellor Angela Merkel earlier in the day reaffirmed her support for the Paris Accord and encouraged other world leaders to continue in the alliance.
For Germany, I can say that, of course, we will continue to fulfill our obligations under the Paris Climate Agreement as part of the European framework. I see it as a fundamental contract also for shaping globalization, and I'm glad other countries on the planet see it the same way.
The United States will join Nicaragua and Syria as the only countries that are not a part of the Paris Agreement. Jessamine Oni, VOA News, Washington.
Well, following President Trump's announcement that the United States will leave the Paris Agreement limiting greenhouse gas emissions, VOA's Steve Baragona looks at the environmental consequences.
In Paris, 197 countries acknowledged climate change is a serious threat. They pledged major cuts in greenhouse gas emissions. Global emissions were on track to rise to 69 gigatons of CO2 per year by 2030 under business as usual. Paris would reduce that to 56 billion. The U.S. pledge makes up about 1/5 of the reduction. China, the world's largest emitter, contributes 27%, and the rest of the world makes up the remainder. But since taking office, President Trump has been working to undo the policies behind the U.S. pledge. From restarting the controversial Keystone XL oil pipeline to ordering a rewrite of the Obama administration's power plant emissions regulations.
Perhaps no single regulation threatens our miners, energy workers, and companies more than this crushing attack on American industry.
In some ways, pulling out of Paris is a formality, says the World Resources Institute's Andrew Light.
The Trump administration has already signaled that they want to do damage to what the last administration was doing with respect to our national targets on climate change. And they were going to do that regardless of whether they stayed in Paris or not.
But Light notes that U.S. emissions are going down regardless of what Trump does. Power plants are switching from coal to cleaner natural gas. Wind and solar are cheaper than fossil fuel power in many places. And, he adds, other forces beyond Trump's control are heading toward a lower carbon economy.
Many states and cities and businesses are already moving in that direction. They're going to continue on the policies that they're doing regardless of this administration. So climatically, not a huge difference, unless other countries start leaving Paris because the U.S. has left Paris.
China has said it will stay the course. India has ambitious plans for renewable energy. Light says it's possible the world will meet the Paris goals without the United States.
If, as predicted, China and India achieve their targets for 2030 earlier than they said they were going to achieve them, then you actually got enough tons out there in the world to make up that gap. But I'm not comfortable with those kinds of calculations.
And Paris alone was not enough to keep the planet from what scientists say are dangerous levels of warming. More action would be needed, and Light says under Trump, that is unlikely. Steve Baragona, VOA News, Washington.
Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. You're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends also. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Coming up, the continent's place in China's modern-day Silk Road. Stay with us.
I'm Jeff Selden, and I work the National Security Beat. National Security Beat is anything that affects the national security of the United States, from counterterrorism to surveillance to even relations with Russia. It's one of the most fascinating beats you can have. It's probably one of the more important beats that you can cover because it touches on so many areas of the world, so many areas of people's day-to-day lives. I'm Jeff Selden, and my beat is national security.
Well, U.S. stocks open slightly higher following a disappointing jobs report. With more details is Africa 54 business correspondent Jill Malandrino reporting from the NASDAQ market site.
U.S. stocks opened slightly higher following the all-important employment report. In fact, we hit some intraday highs at the open of trade. 138,000 jobs were created in the month of May versus consensus of 185,000. The employment rate ticked down to 4.3% versus consensus of 4.4%, and that's because the participation rate moved lower. Average hourly earnings, the key of the report, came in at 0.2%, and that was in line with consensus. This set of data is especially important because they are the last significant economic signal ahead of the Fed's meeting June 13th and 14th. We all know about sell in May and go away, but another investing meme quickly growing in popularity is the June swoon. There's some merit to this idea, as historically June has been a weak month for equities, and last year's Brexit sell-off is still fresh in investors' minds. In fact, since 1950, only August and September have had worse average monthly returns, while over the past 10 years, only January has been down more on average. But here's the good news. Technicals tell a more upbeat story, according to Ryan Dietrich. He's a senior market strategist at LPL Financial. He says June historically has been a weak month for equities, but the catch is some of the worst drops have taken place when the S&P 500 index was beneath its 200-day moving average. That's a key technical level that chartists look at. When the S&P 500 has been in a bullish trend along this long-term trend line like it is now, June has been higher 59% of the time versus 33% when starting below it. Of course, there's always the overhang of what's happening in Washington, D.C. Despite all of the noise, nothing has really changed with policy in terms of taxes and health care, so there really is no clue in terms of what direction the White House is going. And we're also essentially in an earnings vacuum into the middle of July, so the focus is going to continue to be on macro. Things could heat up the third week in June when the FOMC will announce its interest rate hike decision on June 14th, and there's a roughly about an 85% chance rates will move higher according to Fed Fund futures. Then on June 16th, we have an important options expiration cycle where we have 4 different classes of options expiring, and the S&P and Russell indices will rebalance as well. And of course, the close of the second quarter on June 30th, so the back half of the month is really going to be data and volume loaded. From the NASDAQ market site, I'm Jill Malandrino, and this is Africa 54 Business News.
Thanks a lot, Jill. Now, China has touted what it formally calls the Belt and Road Initiative as a new way to boost global development. In May, Chinese President Xi Jinping pledged $124 billion during a summit in Beijing for his new Silk Road plan, which he says is aimed at forging a path of peace, inclusiveness and free trade. Xi said the new Silk Road will be open to all, including Africa and the Americas, which are not situated on the traditional Silk Road. He said the world must create conditions that promote open development and encourage the building of systems of fair, reasonable and transparent global trade and investment rules. But some Western diplomats have expressed unease about China's plan as a whole, seeing it as an attempt to promote Chinese influence globally. They are also concerned about transparency and access for foreign firms to that particular scheme. Now, for more on China's Silk project, or Silk Road project, I'm joined in studio by VOA Mandarin correspondent Zhang Yang. Welcome and thank you for joining us on Africa 54. Now, one of the things that people are looking at in this really massive investments by China, particularly those who are on the continent of Africa, is that the country is spending all this money. It's pledged many more billions. Question is, what is the real motivation? You know, some people sometimes are a little suspicious here.
Well, first of all, basically the One Belt, One Road initiative can be seen as a cornerstone of China's economy strategy for this century. According to the Chinese state media, this initiative includes two projects. The Silk Road economic belt linking with China with Central and Western Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. It is a land-based project initiative. And 21st Century Maritime Silk Road connecting Southeast Asia and North Africa. And so far, some $1 trillion has been invested in this initiative, and the Chinese government is expected to invest another several $1 trillion over the next decade. And China's President Xi Jinping first announced this initiative in 2013, and this initiative can be seen as an important way for China to solve its overcapacity issue.
And actually talking about even the financial side of it, we know that a big chunk of the money that is given to some of these countries, and especially those in Africa, are loans. Some are concerned that the interest rates are really high, almost abnormally high. What are Chinese experts saying about this? Is this perhaps a really good business for China?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it is now a fair concern. I mean, China starts this initiative. I mean, China is the host, right? So I think it is reasonable that China will use this initiative to make benefits as much as possible. But the Chinese government said this initiative will create a mutual benefit situation for all countries in this initiative. So I think so far it's too early to say whether the Chinese government will fulfill its promise. So I think maybe we'll just wait and see.
And perhaps we'll see whether the benefits, eventually the benefit from this investment for the, say, African countries will outweigh the cost of servicing those loans. But there's also the other aspect, and I've traveled to other countries in Africa where you see that massive Chinese projects first, bringing in Chinese equipment, bringing in Chinese materials, and even bringing in Chinese workers, from engineers to laborers. And now, what is the assessment? Is this really fair?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to say. China wants to make benefits from this initiative, but China also has to face a huge risk. I mean, China might get huge benefit from this initiative, but what if this initiative fails? I mean, how to make sure this initiative is launched effectively and timely, because every country participating in this initiative has different economic and political conditions.
Exactly.
So and they have different concerns. So how to gather them and make sure all parties work well and cooperate with each other very well. If China cannot handle this well, then the huge investment will become a huge waste. So if China just focuses on its own benefit, its own interest, and disregard other countries' concern, China will lose its trust and credibility. If China doesn't have trust and credibility, I don't think this initiative will become successful.
Yeah, indeed, that's a valid point, a very huge risk here.
That's right.
And another valid point is whether this will have like uniform development across some of these countries. Zhang, thank you very much for joining us today. And just on there, that's Zhang Yang, his VOA's Mandarin correspondent. Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. Could this ordinary tube be a sign that the future of travel is right here? We'll be right back.
the impacts on South Africa and the United States of America would be extraordinarily severe.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. Now, the steel tunnel may represent high-speed commuter transportation of the future. The Hyperloop was first proposed in 2013 by SpaceX and Tesla Motors co-founder Elon Musk to transport pods of people through a tube at speeds of over 1,000 kilometers per hour. A Hyperloop has levitating pods powered by electricity and magnetism that hurtle through low-friction pipes. A Dutch tech startup and a construction company have now unveiled a Hyperloop test facility at Delft Technical University in Holland. Now, the developers predict that it will offer commuters journey times between Amsterdam and Paris of just 33 minutes. Dubai has already signed a deal with Los Angeles-based Hyperloop One to study the potential for building a Hyperloop line between it and Abu Dhabi. Well, and for those of us traveling at normal speeds, we know traffic can be a nightmare everyone wishes would just go away. Now, the Waze app has helped people get around congestion for years. But now Google says it doesn't just want to get you around traffic, it wants to help end it. Waze is now expanding the Waze Carpool app, which started in Tel Aviv and San Francisco. The platform matches riders and drivers and make carpools happen ahead of time or in real time. It's now another way to make money like an Uber or Lyft. The rider pitches in with a preset amount of no more than 0.54 cents a mile in order to help with gas and wear and tear. And right now, Waze is not taking a commission, but in Israel, it takes a 15% commission on each ride. Well, and finally, glass. It lets the light in, but doesn't provide effective insulation. Now, researchers on Australia's Gold Coast are developing smart window technology that could see the mass production of low-cost, energy-saving glass. With rising electricity costs, the new technology could also lead to a huge reduction in energy bills. The technology works on a small scale, but the challenge is expanding it to a commercial level. For many in Australia, electricity bills have risen by 30% in recent years, with much of that power used for heating or cooling homes. And that is what is trending today. Well, international applications are now down at many American universities, and educators blame a perception that the United States is less than welcoming to overseas visitors. A recent move to limit out-of-state undergraduates at the University of California has heightened concerns. However, international educators who are meeting in Los Angeles say the United States remains the destination of choice for the world's students. Michael Sullivan has more.
The University of California is capping enrollment of out-of-state undergraduates, including foreign students, to make more room for more Californians. But international students usually pay higher tuition fees, so this may not start a trend for public universities in other states.
And I, in fact, think it will most likely be the opposite, because as state funding for higher education continues to become tighter and tighter, and this is only within the public sector, many states are allowing their universities to find new means to recruit students, including an expanded focus on recruiting international students.
Which includes expanded overseas recruitment, already popular at many private schools. Also of concern for international students, President Trump's ban on travel from 6 majority Muslim countries. While its implementation has been blocked so far, international educators say students are watching.
Some of them did prefer to go to Canada or Australia, but still I think it's not had a big impact.
Many American universities actively recruit overseas.
In our math department, if we did not have our Asian students and instructors and graduate students, I don't think we would have a math department.
Studying in America helped a former student from India.
America has already such a big draw, so you have people from so many different parts of the world already coming here. So this is the best place to meet and make connections.
And it helps American students.
They have colleagues and peers who are from those parts of the world that they can build businesses with, start companies with, helps us to grow our footing in other markets that are really important.
Says a university advisor who came here as a student from Sudan.
This country is all about inclusion, and diversity, and that's the secret of America.
These educators agree that public universities must serve American students, but say international students enrich their institutions, and that it's just a question of finding the right balance. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News, Los Angeles.
Well, that's our show for today. Thank you very much for watching. We leave you now with the Guinean artist Mo Kouyate. His song Funkilla is the first single on his new album that will be released in September. Enjoy and have a good night.
Weleme kana bulabala tulo me abele me nya me abeto ge da me abeto fo anyimbe to fo anyimbe to ge mumbena la kela mumbena la fola ke balo be ke kan fo balo be fo kan ke balo be ge kan atumbena la kudo bada Abe minna sila, mimmanke, ama minge, ama mimme, alumanke ku. Ulune kuri wo, mume, fankila sarantila, fankila sarantila, fankila sarantila, fankila sarantila, fankila sarantila, fankila sarantila. Inya bula kula minti la silala iwele me rida bula kumato mi manna sima jetu fola jetu gela jetu diala abena la munta fola fo bali fo ke bali fo je bali fo ame kuri hasigiala ame kuri nafigiala ame kuri fanya fola.
Welcome to English in a Minute. A plate is a dish that you put your food on.
Have a lot on your plate.
Hey Anna, I'm having a party this weekend. You should come.
I wish I could, but my weekend is really busy. I'm baking a wedding cake, writing my article, teaching 2 classes, and oh, my parents are visiting.
Wow, you have a lot on